Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your rear brake pads on a 2017 Toyota Camry. Now the first thing I usually like to do is push this caliper piston back inside the caliper here just by wedging a screwdriver in between this little opening, just like this, and pulling that towards you. Now, before I do that all the way, it's a good idea to pop the hood and take a look at the master cylinder and make sure that there's enough room inside there, because you're going to be pushing the fluid backwards through the brake lines and it's going to end up in the master cylinder. And if it's too full, or if somebody's been topping that off, it's going to overflow. Now another option, you can also just take off this rubber cap right here and crack open the bleeder screw, and you can push it out and push the old fluid out that way, and that's fine too. It's however you prefer to do it. If the fluid's looking kind of old, that's a good way to cycle it out. You can also take this off completely and use a caliper compression tool and push the piston back in. Lots of different ways to do this. It's really whatever you prefer, but what I'm going to do is pop the hood and go take a look and see if we have enough room for that fluid to go backwards up inside the master cylinder. Now this is our master cylinder right here. This is the reservoir for it, and I already knew it was pretty full because I just did the front brakes yesterday. The fluid doesn't look bad, but there's just too much in here. Somebody's been topping it off, so I've just got this little syringe. You can also use a turkey baster or something and pull some of the old fluid out. And again, you can see that this fluid doesn't look too bad, but we're just going to dump that into this little paper cup and recycle that properly. That's about all we need to do. Now some people will always take off the cap when they push the caliper piston back in. I don't usually, because they are vented and it just keeps moisture away from the brake fluid, which it does absorb that and it'll start to go bad. All right, now we've got enough room that we can push the caliper piston back in. We won't have any issues with that overflowing and making a mess over here. All right, so now we can push the caliper piston back in. I'm just using a flathead screwdriver. Just kind of wedge it in between the pad and the outside edge of the caliper and just pull that towards you. And you'll see that just completely shift like that. Sometimes you need to reposition the screwdriver to make sure it's pushed all the way, but now you can see we've got some extra room in there for the brake pad material. And then we can loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts. They're 14 millimeter. That's what those guys look like. Now we can take off the brake caliper. I like to hang them with just a little hook up here on the coil spring, so they're just up and out of the way. Now we can pull out the old brake pads. You can see they're worn down, but haven't quite hit this little noisemaker little thing that scratches on the rotor and tells you it's time to change them. You can see this one's getting pretty close, but not quite there. So we're not going to change the rotors this time. We're just going to put pads on. Now a lot of brake pad kits will come with the new hardware, so we're going to go ahead and just change that as well. Pull out these are abutment clips or pad retainers. They wear out right here where the pad slides on there. Now I'm also going to pull out the slide pins here. You can just kind of hold the rubber boot while you take them out one at a time and just wipe off the old grease. Now just sometimes I'll put that back in once or twice and try to really clean that little slide pin area out. This is silicone based grease, or similar to like silicone paste, and I just put a little bit there, just kind of swirl it around on the clean part of my glove. Now don't use too much of this. If you use too much, you won't be able to push the slide pin all the way back in like that. It has to lock into place. Sometimes you pull back on the little rubber boot and that will burp any of the excess air out of there. Just make sure that that slides freely. We'll do the same thing with this lower slide pin. Hold the boot with one hand while you pull it out. And you can see this one has the little rubber ring on the end. If you use the wrong kind of grease here, that will swell up and it'll cause that to stick. But let's just do our best to clean it out. And then we'll put some new grease there. Swirl that around. And put it right back in. And just make sure that it moves freely and looks good. A little bit of air up there. You can tell when there's too much grease or if there's any air, the slide pins will push back out, and that can cause dragging on your outside brake pad. So you just want to make sure that they're not going to push back out too much on their own. There we go. Now before we put the new clips on, we just want to clean off all this rust and best we can with a little wire brush. Now if you live in a really rusty area, you can put a little bit of grease here as well. Just the smallest little dab right here. Now we're on the West Coast, but this car is moving to the East Coast, so I'm gonna just try to prep it as best I can with a little bit of Sil Glyde there, a little bit of coating. Just make sure you don't get any on the rotor. It looks like I did get a little bit there. Just clean that off. But that little bit of Sil Glyde right there will maybe help protect that metal. And then we'll just pop these in place. Just kind of press that, lock it in place. You may need to use a little screwdriver here at the end. Try to push that part in so where it doesn't rub on the rotor itself. I'm gonna go take the parking brake off. Just make sure when you're putting these new clips in, this little middle part right here sometimes wants to scratch on the rotor, so you need to make sure that it's fully seated, and a screwdriver works pretty well for that. So some of the ones in the kit, it came with 8 of these, so some of these, this little part right here is a little wider, so these will just pop right in. Yeah, just test it, make sure it's not rubbing, and if you need to, just wedge a little screwdriver in there, push it up all the way so it doesn't scratch the rotor. You can see on the old pads, we've got that little clip right there, a little squealer, kind of retains the pad, but it also will let you know when it's scratching on the rotor. So we're going to make sure that we put the new ones on the same orientation as the old ones, which goes right there on that side. And before we put in the brake pads, I do like to put a little layer of grease here. I'm just using this little reserves on the back of my glove. A little bit on the back, a little bit on these ends. I know some people don't like to use grease on the ends and they think that it catches a lot of dust and debris, but you can see on the old piece right here where it was actually, you know, it's really wearing there. So, and the grease will prevent that from scratching in or digging into that. Still allows it to move without gathering too much of that grease and dust from the road. Same thing on the outside pad. We'll just put that same clip right back in place. Really thin layer of grease on the back and just a little bit at the ends. Again, we're not wanting to do a lot here. We don't want to gather a lot of brake dust on these little clips, but just that little bit of grease helps it move the way it wants to, and it seems to really cut down on the brake noise. Now we've got our pads in place. Just make sure everything looks good, which it does. We can take out this little hanger and just make sure you take a look at the boot, make sure there's no leaks or anything. And then we can put our caliper over the new brake pads now. Just drop it right into place. Sometimes you have to pull on the slide pins to line it up. There we go. All right, now the torque spec on this, it's only 20 foot-pounds. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, I recommend you grab one. This is the Gear Wrench 85062. It's been a good torque wrench for me, but we just put that right there. And we're gonna torque that to 20 foot-pounds. If the slide pin spins here, you may have to grab a 14mm open-end wrench to put it there. That's pretty much it, just same for the other side. Once you're done, go ahead and step on the brake pedal several times until it feels firm. Now don't push it all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just pump it about halfway several times until it's firm, and what that will do is push the caliper piston back out, pressing these pads up against the rotor where they need to be. When you're done with that, don't forget to double check and verify the level of brake fluid in your master cylinder. Torque everything to spec and you should be good to go. Again, there's lots of ways to do this. This is just a simple pad change in the way that I've done it for many years. I hope you liked the video. If you found it helpful or liked it, just feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll put a link in the description where you can pick up some of these parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.